Welcome to Up on Game presents Taylor Scouting. Coach Randy Taylor is bringing his 40-plus years of knowledge to you. This is Taylor Scouting. And now, here's Coach Randy Taylor.
Hey, folks, this is Coach Taylor again on the Up on Game Network. We're here doing the podcast Taylor Scouting. You can find us on all of your on YouTube at Up on Game Presents. The podcasts are on iHeartRadio or iHeart Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcasts. As usual, we're going to do an educational and a football-related discussion. We're going to try to teach you some things and try to help you as coaches and athletes be better in your sport and at your position. I am lucky to be here with a young guy that I've known since he was born, my nephew, Brett Flaherty. I'm going to introduce him in a second, but I want to give you just a little bit of what this show is going to be about and why I have Brett on. Brett's a guru, in my opinion, and he is a fitness movement guru. And you know, after watching thousands of highlight videos over the past 40 plus years, you know, I see this all the time. Flexibility is such an issue. Players are stiff in their ankles, believe it or not, or their hips or their knees or their whatever the joint might be. So I've got Brett as the expert in training athletes. He's an inventive coach. He'll help educate us on really 3 exercises is what you could become a very flexible and agile and more strong football player, if that makes sense. So Brett Flaherty is a trainer in Southern California. He's also my nephew. And I'm a huge fan of his, not because he's my nephew, but because of the world he's created for himself in fitness, his energy, his creativity. And like I said, he's a guru in his field. And I listen to everything he says about flexibility, movement, nutrition. And he may talk about some things that football players haven't thought of and from a holistic point of view. So welcome, Brett. Glad to have you, buddy.
Thanks for having me, Uncle Randy. I really appreciate it.
This is my sister's son, and he grew up very close to me and our family in Illinois. And so I've gotten a chance to see a lot of things that he's gone through and been involved in, and just very proud of him. And this field of movement and flexibility and strength is something that I rely on him. And so what I want to do first is Brett, give us an overview of your philosophy in this industry.
Sounds good. Thanks for all the kind words, Uncle. Yeah, my philosophy, with my football players, my athletes, number one is to build well-trained skeletal muscle. Now, what I mean by that is you can build muscle and bulk, and it can give you some strength and some size. But if that muscle can't move through planes of motion and full range of motion, then it's not well-trained skeletal muscle. So we need to take these guys that either have muscle or build muscle on them and make that into a more well-trained skeletal muscle to promote the movement of that new strength.
How does the tendons and ligaments and all of that, the other parts of that joint, how does that all fit into the muscle flexibility and strength?
That's a great question. The thing with ligaments and tendons are they don't stretch much, nor do they move much. They're more of a compensatory. They're more of like just a stabilizing thing. It's more of the muscle fibers that can promote pliability, especially when they're hydrated. But more what you want to think of is the connective tissue system itself, which is this fascial system that runs throughout our entire body, through the muscle fibers, around the joints. That system we want to keep hydrated. And the best way to keep that hydrated is through movement itself. So I try to tell all my athletes, you want improved movement, you need to move. And that's it. It's moving in new ways.
The sounds pretty simple, right?
Yeah.
So tell us your process on taking an athlete from day one through, let's just say, a time frame that should exhibit results. How do you start a guy?
I'll get an athlete. I typically will get my athletes in the kind of the junior high age into high school age. So when they come to me, they're already been playing their sport. They've already been playing football for a little bit at least, and have had some coaching, and hopefully have already had even some muscle build at that point. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to assess them. I need to see what their posture is, because all movement stems from a correct or incorrect posture. So I want to analyze their movement through reaching overhead or squats or just some basic floor stuff, so I can see how they move, where they're stuck, where they're not. Then we go from there and we start to work on, obviously the negatives that they have within their movement system. And everyone's different, but your typical people, especially, in this day and age, you have these student athletes and they have to sit a lot. So their posture gets a bit ruined from that. They're a little forward, they're a little collapsed. So we try to immediately fix that and get the posterior chain, meaning all the muscles in the back of the body, strong, so that the muscles on the side of the body and the front can move more effectively. So we basically start with posture.
You said something interesting to me earlier about building from the ground up and how important the ankles are in this whole process. And I'll say this: athletes, football players, really need to have more flexibility in their ankles. And we're going to show a video here in a little bit about that exactly. So, Brett, talk about the ankles and how important is the ankle in the athlete's ability to move, and both laterally and forward.
Well, it's huge. I mean, because all movement starts at the foot and the ankle, that entire complex. And that is one area of the body that needs to rotate. It needs to be pliable for the rest of the energy to go up the chain, because we're an earth-based being. So everything we do, we're pushing off of surface. All of that surface energy that we create from that push has to go through that first major joint, which is the ankle. So if that joint doesn't move correctly, the whole chain up the entire system is off. So I need to start at the base and build up from there. It wouldn't make sense for me to start at the neck or the spine or the hips if the ankle's not moving correctly.
And the video is it shows such a subtle movement. Obviously, up and down with your ankle and foot is kind of common, but the lateral movement that you try to create is subtle, but still really important. Is that safe to say?
Yes, exactly. That movement that we're talking about, that inversion, eversion of the joint, that's called your subtalar joint. And that joint needs to move, needs to kind of collapse in and collapse out, which we'll show in the video. And it doesn't move too much. It's a short range of motion, but it has to be there. What you're talking about before is kind of the toes up is the dorsiflexion, the toes down is the plantar flexion. Most people get that and they have that. It's that inversion, eversion movement that's so important for a rotational aspect that goes up through the rest of the body.
So if I'm the football coach and my team is on the field and we're doing that static stretching, which I know you're not a huge fan of that, but still it's something, and we're not moving that ankle side to side, then we might be missing out on something. Or even in the weight room, what kind of drills in the weight room would be good for that ankle movement?
Truthfully, the best drill for that movement as far as the strengthening aspect and mobility would be the squat. But for that to happen correctly, we just need basic stretching and repetitive movement of that joint.
So that's perfect timing. You set me up for the next video is what's called, you call it the Primal Squat, which I like because I like words, I like things to, kill them, and primal and tough and all those kind of things, right? Warrior, all that kind of stuff. So yeah. Primal Squat is kind of cool. And we've got a video for that So what do you hope to get out of the primal squat?
When I see someone squat, and the primal squat is that deep squat hold, where you can get that butt almost to the grass. That's what we want to accomplish. Now, what that's going to do is that's going to stretch the ankles, the knees, the hips, the spine, all the way up to the shoulders. It's really a full body movement if done correctly. Now, you see in this video, I have one of my clients do this. This young man is a great athlete. He was a collegiate volleyball player, but he does have some movement issues because he tends to overtrain a bit and stuff. And you'll see him go into the squat, and he won't be able to keep his spine straight. And at the bottom of that squat, you'll kind of see his tail tuck under, and his lower back will round a bit. That's from immobility in the hip and that ankle, not allowing the spine to be the position that it's in. So as we improve that, his spine would straighten a little more. He would have less of that arch in his back. His butt would be closer to the ground. You would see more flexion in the knee and the ankle joint, which is what we're looking for.
Is that basically you fix that by what reps of doing it perfectly? Is that kind of how you would teach it and help them get better?
True. Yeah, as perfect as they can. There's other movements that we can go in and out of that will improve those things. And yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of static stretching, but it does have its time and its place. We might want to static stretch that ankle joint for a bit, or maybe the knee if one side isn't flexing as much as the other. But basically, yeah, the best thing you could do is just sit in that primal squat as many times as you can for as long as you can every day.
The O-line guys, especially in all positions, if you're a waist bender, you really can't play the sport. And there's too many OLs that are waist benders, and it gets them exposed by losing a solid base and their balance. They reach, they do different things. And that's the case with D linemen doing the similar thing. But O-line is such a knee bend deep squat kind of a position. I think of that first. How does this help the skill players and the quarterbacks and those kind of kids?
Well, let's talk about the running back, for instance. So the tailback has to be very low and very strong in that low position. So the primal squat could be the number one for that tailback because it would teach his body to maintain strength and stability from a low position. So he can get down and drive through people that way. If he doesn't have that type of mobility, it doesn't matter how strong he is. He can't. It's like trying to load up a rubber band that has knots in it. You're not going to be able to pull all the way back. But if that rubber band has got none of those knots, the whole system is hydrated, then he can get low. But more importantly, he can snap powerfully out of that low position.
So take that and go into, let's just say, linebackers and safeties. That those kind of players who they have to turn and run. They have to do things with their waist and their lower body and feet, and the strength of that sticking that foot in the ground and those kind of things. Talk about a little bit about those type of players.
And if we're talking about a linebacker, they have to explode when they see the direction that they need to turn in. So that's all going to start with their ankle. They've got to have that ankle mobility and that strength to start that energy push off that ground to go up through the system. And that's what the squat is doing for you. It's not only getting that ankle in the correct position, it's getting enough stretch on the knee and hips so that when you do make that movement, nothing's stuck within the movement. You're looking for a flow with these movements. You're trying to take strength and make it flow. So if that linebacker instantly has to go left, he's got to plant that right foot, and that ankle has to be strong as well as it has to give. So that's how it would equate from that type of position. Now, if you're talking about an individual skill position like the quarterback, which is like no other position in football because they have to throw the ball as well. Well, I mean, if they're a right-hander and they're planting off of that right foot to create that energy, if that ankle's stiff or even that hip is stiff, it's not going to translate through to the arm because they're throwing with their hips and their core and their legs. They're not really throwing with their arm if it's done correctly. So it not only is it giving them the mobility that they need, it gives them the body awareness that they need, that proprioception, so that they can feel their extremities in space without even having to look. That's important too with mobility, is it builds that body awareness.
The a lot of the terminology in football talks about, flat back and sink those hips and drive through the defensive player or the ball carrier or whatever it might be. There's a thing about the last 6 inches. That's 6 inches where you flatten that back, roll your hips. Talk about the ability of this, and then the next stretch, which I love, how that helps as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, we get in this next stretch, you're going to see how these guys have to bring their legs up so far. And when you create mobility in the hips and that whole pelvic complex, by turn, you're going to create mobility in the vertebrae the way it needs to be. So that gives you that flat back, because that flat back makes a strong posterior chain, those muscles all in the back, so that you have drive without losing energy because the posture's off. So we're getting back to posture there.
Yeah. Can you explain in your terms the rolling of the hips and sinking and then rolling those hips? How does that translate to your world?
Yeah. Okay. So if you're to have that straight spine and that strong base, that pelvis needs to roll forward. If it's too far forward and it's stuck there, it has nowhere to come from to roll. A lot of people have a pelvis forward from sitting. It's called anterior pelvic tilt. And that kind of locks up all those front hip muscles as well as the side ones. So if that pelvis can't roll forward and back, then the vertebrae has to do too much. The knees have to do too much. You're taking out that center of the body. There's 3 parts of the body that have to move: the ankles, the hips, and the thoracic spine, that whole area of kind of the shoulders and chest. Those areas have to rotate. And if they don't, other parts of the body that you don't want to move is going to take on that resistance. So that's the key, is that you need the body to move where it needs to move and be strong and stable where it should be, which is basically the core right between those areas.
It reminds me of the idea that, I have some knee problems, and when my knees are sore and when I walk, my back becomes sore. And it's just kind of like you're talking, everything works together.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's go into video number 3. And this is, I love everything that's the world's greatest or the best or the whatever it might be. Like I said, this is called the world's greatest stretch. And we're going to show this video and we're going to talk about it. Talk about that in terms of football and athletics.
I mean, as far as athletics and football, you probably couldn't find a better, more dynamic stretch, because you're starting from a plank position. So now if it's done correctly, your core is engaged, you're a stiff, stable plank. From that position, you're taking your foot, your leg way up laterally, high into the left or the right. So immediately we have a big stretch on the hip, knee, and ankle from that movement alone. Now we take one of the arms off of the ground, that inside arm, and we reach it to the sky, so we get that thoracic rotation. So now we're getting back to those 3 parts of the body that have to move: the thoracic, the hip, and the ankle. That's going to accomplish, within that movement alone, is going to accomplish all of those. You add on to that it's a pretty aggressive core movement too. So not only are you promoting the mobility, you're getting the added core strength within that. And then I want to go back to the proprioception as well, which means, basically your awareness of your extremities in space. It's going to build that proprioception to the point where you should be able to start doing these movements with your eyes closed, and it should be efficient. That is going to translate onto the field with strength and control and injury prevention. So that's another thing with this mobility. It has a lot to do with injury prevention as well.
This looks like that stretch looks like it would be great for quarterbacks or any player needing to rotate their upper body and trunk. The wide receivers high pointing the ball, the defensive backs being able to turn and run and flip those hips and then make plays on the football. All of that looks like it would translate into those positions. So talk about how this benefits the quarterback.
Oh, for sure. And one thing before we go back to the quarterback, speaking about those corners and those receivers, they have to have mobility not only on the ground, but in the air. So this floating of the leg will help with that in air. Now, let's go back to the quarterback. The quarterback has to generate that energy throughout his entire body to eventually lead out of his hand. But he has to do that while he's moving. So the mobility and the strength, and then the rotational aspect, in my quarterbacks, especially any athlete that I have that throws, I got to have them with a lot of mobility overhead. I need them to be able to reach overhead and get that shoulder up to the ear or above it. That allows the shoulder blades to move so that they're more pliable, more whippy in their arm. So that arm should act like a whip and a rubber band. It shouldn't act like a stick. So I want my quarterback's throwing motion from the ankle all the way to the tips of the fingers be fluid and mobile and snappy. And we're only going to do that with the movement because that promotes hydration within the body. And that type of movement will do that for them.
And we don't want to forget, like, the kickers and punters and long snappers, those specialists, again, have limb movement and need flexibility. That's got to be huge for skill or specialists.
Yeah, when you're talking about the kicker and the punter, those guys need to have extreme mobility, maybe more so than any other player on that field, especially within the posterior chain of their lower body. I mean, just imagine how much their hamstring has to stretch every time they make these big swinging kicks, that being that, back muscle in your upper leg. So for my kickers, I am going to add more static stretching. I need to get them long in the back so that they can load up like a rubber band and snap through with that kick.
It makes a lot of sense. I'm an old long snapper, so you don't have to talk too much about those old guys. We're all goofy anyway, but you can tell that you see the benefits of stretching for that long snapper to reach through and snap and have that band and everything like that. So Brett, what I want to do is give me your closing point that you would to your client as you're releasing them from the session that you're in. How do you end it? And then maybe your kind of last thoughts of how important this is.
Okay. So I get a client, and let's say it's their first session, and we've gone through the evaluation. We talked about the important things that we need to do. And now I'm releasing him. I'm going to go over him the areas within his movement and posture I saw that there might be issues and what to do about those things. But what I try to instill in these athletes is you have to learn to move in new ways. A thing that I love to do with my athletes is I love to get them crawling. How often do they crawl? They're not doing that, right? So I'm just getting them to move in different linear ways than they normally would because they're always training in one sport. Well, let's take that football player and teach them ballet or whatever, right? Anything that's a different type of movement that will give them control. So I try to get them to think outside of the box. Let's think about sitting less. I know you're a student athlete, but maybe we could stand a little more often when you study. Maybe we could take study breaks and do some of those primal squats. Because really, when it comes to mobility and flexibility, it's what you do more often throughout the day than it is for just that hour to two that you're in the gym. So it's that consistency of movement. That old saying, motion is lotion. Well, that's so true. You hydrate your system on a cellular level, the more you move. And the more you move, the more you build this well-trained skeletal muscle that has anti-inflammatory components to it. It releases myokines that are proteins that are anti-inflammatory. So the more you move, the less inflamed you are, the more pliable you are. So I try to get them to think about consistent movement throughout the day.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And when they do those, they can take advantage of those times to picture and analyze what they want to do on the field. Get a meditational aspect to it going as well. Try to get your mind wrapped around the type of athlete that you want to be.
Later, this is great stuff. And what I want to do later with you is do something on nutrition, because I know you're really passionate about that as well in this whole process. So I just want to wrap this up, guys. Thanks, Brett. How do people reach you if they want to have you train them or give them some knowledge?
Yeah, I'm pretty old school. Not too much in the social media stuff. They can just reach me via email. It's flahfitness@gmail.com. I'm sure you'll put a link, but that's typically how people get in contact with me.
Flahfitness, which is FLAH fitness @gmail.com, right?
Perfect. Yeah, it stands for Flaherty Fitness. Yes, sir.
That's great. So Brett Flaherty, thank you for coming on, talking about the movement skills and being better at flexibility. And ready to wrap this up for the podcast. Again, remember, this is Up on Game Network. You can see me on YouTube on Up on Game Presents. You can grab this podcast on iHeartRadio, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. You can please rate and review us. You can follow us on Up on Game Network. And you can also follow me, Coach Taylor, at rtaylorfb Scout. And that is also where you can reach me if you want me to evaluate your highlight video and give you some advice on that. rtaylorfb Scout. Glad to have you. Really appreciate you coming out. And Brett, again, thanks. And I'll see you in a little bit.
Thanks again, Uncle Randy. Appreciate it. Take care.